Hey guys, what's up and welcome to my video on sustain in Vainglory. Now, this is a video that is very topical right now because in update 2.8, Vainglory really hit early game sustain. They took away the halcyon potions and they cut the Book of Eulogies healing by a considerable amount. Now, before we get into this video, I want to talk about why I actually think that's a good thing. Specifically because the lane actually means something now. Now, previous to this update, I could pick a melee hero into a ranged hero, and I would actually do quite well. That really shouldn't happen. In every other MOBA in the world, if you pick a ranged hero into a melee hero, you're going to have a bad time. I know I came from a League of Legends background, I mained top lane. If I picked a melee hero and the enemy picked a Gnar, for instance, which is, if you don't know, a ranged hero in League of Legends, the Gnar would usually win out the trades, and I would find it very difficult to lane, and I was understandably put under a lot of pressure for having a bad lane matchup. Previous to this update, it didn't mean diddly squat what your lane matchup was, because there was so much healing that you could actually just literally face tank the opponent for a bit, and Book of Eulogies after one wave would get you back up to full HP. So it means a bit more now to have a good lane matchup, and if you're a better laner, you can actually look for 1v1 potential. Something that I was very happy to see, because I think Vainglory should reward players who are highly skilled or look to have that 1v1 skill matchup. So I'm hoping in this, over the course of this update, that laners who are highly skilled and laners who look to want to trade more often are going to be rewarded because of the lack of sustain now given over to the enemy. And it also means that lane matchups are a bit more important. Admittedly, on the games that I've played so far, lane matchups don't seem to mean as much as I hoped they would, but maybe people are still very reluctant to search for trades, and as this meta evolves, if people start being more aggressive in lane, we might see those lane matchups come in later down the line. So that's why I like the changes. Now, understandably, there are some drawbacks with this. If you remove early game healing, the player base is going to favour heroes that give healing to themselves or give healing to allies. That's why Grace, that's why Lyra, Samuel, Cruel, even to an extent Ozo coming back in, because their early game sustain is very good in their kits. Now, why is that important? Well, what sustain does is it helps cover mistakes. If you play absolutely perfectly and make all of the right decisions and all of the right moves, you shouldn't actually need sustain because you're just going to beat your opponent by making those right decisions. By having sustain, it allows you to cover for your mistakes. So in solo queue, you know that neither you nor your enemies or your allies are going to play perfectly. But you want to be able to cover the base if your allies don't play perfectly. So I play a lot of Lyra right now because she's very good at covering for my allies' mistakes. And so obviously sustain also brings other elements in as well. If you're a team that really wants to push the advantage early on, you want to continue pressure in lane, you're going to get more pressure on the enemy turret by just out-sustaining your opponent. So by removing early game sustain, you've naturally elevated sustain in Vainglory in terms of hero kits, even though we already had a lot of pressure on hero kit sustain anyway. So it's now become even more important. The likes of Lyra and Grace are even more so important than they were previously because the sustain that they bring is very good. So let's have a look at the sustain, and we'll classify it into different areas, and we'll talk about them in sort of their individual aspects as well. So obviously we can separate healing into multiple different aspects. Now I want to focus specifically on early game healing because early game healing is the biggest part now of the changes, and if anything that can help your early game and help your early game sustain and healing, it's going to be a little bit better than it was previously. Now you can separate that into items, you can separate that into heroes. I know that not every hero in the game that has got some form of sustain is here, and I know you might be saying where's Book of Eulogies, etc. Well, I'm just doing a little blanket approach at this point in time, not including everything, it's just to illustrate a point. So if we break this down, you can break it down into early game items or self-healing items, you can break it down into self-healing heroes, and you can break it down into things that cover both. Now, Obviously, you get the healing flask when it starts. The time of it and timing and use of it is very important because obviously 2 minutes is a long cooldown. I think Iron Guard Contract has gotten a little bit more useful now. It will help a laner that isn't particularly performing well. It will help in jungle sustain as well if your jungler doesn't have sustain built into their kit. So I definitely think Iron Guard Contract has become, if it wasn't already very highly sought after, it's definitely more highly sought after now because the sustain that it provides is pretty invaluable, especially at keeping a laner in the lane, for instance, if they're taking bad trades all the time. I would always recommend Iron Guard Contract, especially for solo queue. But obviously, there are plenty of heroes in there that do both self-sustain and healing for others as well. So those are a couple of heroes that I think are going to be obviously pretty good on this update. Now, what is it that you can do to try and counteract healing? Because obviously if you don't punish an early game composition with a lot of healing, then they are just going to out sustain you, especially if they use that sustain to take favourable trades with you. The problem with Vainglory at this point in time is that it's very easy to snowball the early game, because previously if you took a bad trade in the jungle, you could just use Halcyon Potions and get back on track. It's not really the way that it works now. If you take a bad trade in lane, you take a bad trade in the jungle, and you get forced to use your healing flask, the enemy then has a 2-minute period where if they haven't used their healing flask, they can continuously look to battle you, knowing that they've got that advantage of the shield and the healing from that item to try and find a favourable situation for themselves, which just means in general you're going to have a better time if you've got sustain on your kit, because you know that even if you burn your healing flask, you're going to be okay, because you've got a Lyra, because you've got a Cruel or a Samuel who can just naturally get their health back anyway. So the way to try and counteract that is you look to take very early aggressive gankers or very early aggressive junglers. So the likes of Lance and Glaive are starting to rise in popularity again, because, I mean, Glaive has always been popular, Lance has definitely been there or thereabouts, but they can gank the lane very heavily. So if you have an enemy laner that has got sustain, or an enemy captain that's consistently sustaining their laner, the way to try and counteract that is by looking for these burst ganks to try and take them out. So ganking has become very important now, because advantages in lane mean a lot more. If you gank and force them to burn their healing flask, you've got another 2 minutes where you can do the same again, and they won't have their healing flask to compensate. It also means they won't be able to defend their turret, and with the first turret getting a bit of a nerf in terms of health value, it's a little bit easier to take that. And taking turret guys is very, very important. So obviously, if you're able to then gank and consistently put pressure on the enemy laner, it's more likely that you're going to get your hands on that ever so elusive first turret, which is obviously a good way to set things up and start your gameplay. And I've been doing a lot of testing. This is just another note about sustain. I really don't think there is a better item than Fountain to go as first item on Captain still. The 15-second nerf to the cooldown wasn't enough to make me turn around and say, I don't want Fountain as a first item anymore. So I would still recommend Fountain as a first item for most captains. It's a very, very useful teamfight tool. And again, Vainglory is very dominated by teamfights. That's a separate topic in itself, but I hope when 5v5 comes out, we get a big extension in macro strategy, because that's something that I'll be really looking forward to. Right now in Vainglory, if you're a better mechanical player, you can often win because you need to teamfight to win Vainglory. So if you're interested in my sort of thoughts on 3v3 and what makes a good Vainglory player, I will make a video on that. This is just more a little discussion around healing and talking about healing in general, but I'm really hoping to create more videos on sort of macro strategy when 5v5 comes out. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. Apologies again, this isn't a super informative video. I just wanted to talk about healing and why it's so important right now, just because of the changes, and help you understand why having a good early game means more now. You need to be really careful about your lane matchups. You need to be really careful about how you approach the jungle, because if you make mistakes, they are more easily punished just due to the lack of sustain. And if you want to go into solo queue and babysit your teammates, especially as a captain, now is the time to start picking up things like Lyra, because Lyra is, even Adagio and Lyra captains are both perfectly fine, but my favourite hero to play in solo queue as a captain main right now is Lyra, because you can just make up for your ally's mistakes. You know, if your ally makes a mistake and burns healing flask, that's it. They're screwed for 2 minutes. You know, they either have to go to base and miss experience or miss jungle rotations, or they sit in lane and potentially get killed. So That's why I'm going for Lyra specifically, because I just really like the way that she can help make up for my teammates' mistakes if they make any. And if you don't make any, you're obviously really good at making plays in the late game as well anyway. Lyra scales so well regardless. So anyway, hope this has been an interesting discussion for you guys. This is just one of those videos where I'm going to talk a little bit about a subject without any real meaningful outcome. But anyway, I hope it's been interesting, and you also got to see a bit of my ranked play that I played today. I recorded this game today, which I just thought would be fun to add as a background. I will see you soon.